So feminist communities for climate justice will amplify, reflect and respond to the lived experiences of women and marginalised groups in the face of climate injustice. It will advocate with women and marginalised groups as active partners of the just transition, influencing and engaging with national and local policy on climate justice, reflecting feminist and gendered community work values. The project will mobilise the collective efforts of grassroots organisations across Ireland through the establishment of the Communities for Climate Justice National Network. And this network will bring together women and marginalised community groups nationally and internationally to support and learn from one another while embracing and embedding feminist climate justice in their work, their group and their community. And so it's really great that we have such a large base of communities as it is within the Women's Council and Community Work Ireland to tap into, but we wish to expand beyond that for this particular network. And we would love for you that are on the call to consider joining that, whether you're a community group or organisation, just get in touch with us after this webinar. And then we also want to train community workers and communities to respond to climate impacts. So we are developing and will deliver a capacity strengthening certificate programme in partnership with Maynooth University's Department of Applied Social Studies. And this will integrate climate justice within the programme that already exists. And this will be available to people that are already working with community groups, such as women organisations or marginalised groups. And the feminist climate justice content will be built within the existing Community Work in a Change in Ireland programme. And we'd hope that the participants will take their learnings to their communities and integrate climate justice throughout. And not just in an isolated climate justice case, but making the connections between their existing work and ongoing work and the challenges and the climate breakdown and its impacts. And alongside this, we'll be creating toolkits. So a toolkit to develop campaigning strategies based on feminist climate justice, and a toolkit to support the assessment of climate impacts, future risks on communities and climate justice proofing. Along with these, we'll also have training resources and module content and other webinars and much more, and we'll be making all of that readily available to everyone as well. And beyond all of these elements, the real success lies in the resilience that this campaign will instill within communities and strengthen, allowing them to take ownership of their own just transition and improving their quality of life. So why now? Why women and marginalised communities? So Ireland has legally binding emission targets, 50% reduction by 2030, which is in 7 years' time, and net zero emissions by 2050. Net zero emissions means achieving a balance between greenhouse gas emissions produced and those taken out of the atmosphere, with the ultimate goal of cutting greenhouse gas emissions to as close to zero as possible. And so this is all happening within our lifetimes. All future policy decisions will be impacted by these targets. And there is no policy area or crisis that we are currently experiencing that does not have a link to climate breakdown. And all policy is climate policy. And all policy needs to be gender, poverty and equality proofed. Women and marginalised groups are more likely to be hardest hit by the climate crisis and its impacts in Ireland and globally. And women are socioeconomically disadvantaged compared to men, with lower incomes and access to levels of education. And this leaves them with less to adapt or to recover from the loss of resources essential to their livelihoods in times of disaster. And along with this, care work is key to how women experience their lives and also how they are impacted by the climate crisis. Their input is essential in ensuring that future climate action and climate justice does not worsen existing gender inequality. And on that note, I'm going to hand you over to Vanessa, who will go into a bit more detail about particular areas that we've been focusing in on. And just a quick reminder that it would be great if you please would throw in some questions into the chat box that we can address at the end. So thank you. On over to Vanessa.
All right, Vanessa. identifying existing gaps.
Just if you want to start again there.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Up until now, we have been researching, gathering information, and discussing the project with others while creating an in-house literature review, identifying existing gaps in climate policy with regards to gender and community. And I will now be touching on the key pillars that came up in our research. So, just transition. The just transition is the process of us transitioning as a society to a low carbon way of life to help us reach our carbon emissions reductions targets. Work, transport, energy use, and housing are just some of the areas that will require transformation to become low carbon. A truly equitable, just transition ensures that these transformations do not leave anyone behind and do not hurt some groups in society disproportionately either. There should be no transition at the expense of others. This means our rural communities should not be blamed, and the scaling down or transformation of industries like peat production and agriculture must be done in conversation with the communities who rely on them for their livelihoods. That's why the establishment of the Just Transition Commission, disappointingly delayed until 2024, is crucial in making this a reality. To name just one example, consultation with disabled people in a just transition means that accessibility is a part of the planning process and not just an afterthought when we expand our public transportation fleet or pedestrianize our streets. The same process must apply to all marginalised communities to ensure that they are included every step of the way in making our green future a reality. Rising energy bills are tied directly to the unstable nature of fossil fuel energy costs and the desire for profit over human need. Many people are sadly choosing between heating their homes or feeding their families. The traveller community are particularly impacted by rising energy costs, spending 5 to 6 times the national average to keep trailers warm. Our housing crisis is also tied to this energy and climate crisis. Many Irish homes are energy inefficient, meaning they are more expensive to run. This is worsened in the private rental sector, where tenants are paying rent on top of these energy bills and have no say in whether their property is retrofitted or not. The upfront cost of retrofitting, even with government subsidies, remains out of reach for the majority of the population. Women are at greater risk of energy poverty due to their lower average income, and lone parents, often women, older women living alone, disabled people, and carers are particularly at risk also. European research has shown us that older women have a higher winter mortality rate due to their increased vulnerability to energy poverty. Communities all over the country are reliant on care work, both paid and unpaid. It is essential for the functioning of our society and is often carried out by women. Yet care work has been undervalued by the state and by society for too long, despite the fact that it is and always has been low carbon work. Carers, community workers, teachers, and healthcare workers provide essential work for our society, but are paid poorly for it. For example, education is often touted as crucial for our green transition, yet our teachers are currently being priced out of their homes and their jobs. These caring jobs are 26 times greener than manufacturing jobs, but are seldom part of the green jobs discourse. Giving greater value to care work, better pay, better hours, and better working conditions would allow for women to fully participate in economic, political, and social life. Half of all of our journeys need to be walked, cycled, or taken by public transport by 2030 to lower our emissions. Yet recent research has shown that 69% of all trips in Ireland are still taken by car. Rural areas in particular lack good infrastructure to avail of greener modes of transportation, leaving them locked into car dependency and isolating those without access to a car. The upfront cost of greener electric vehicles is still out of reach for many, and adequate charging infrastructure will be needed across the country to make them viable for all. We need more transport infrastructure, more public transport, safe cycle paths, and pedestrian footpaths. It needs to be safe for women to use, it needs to be affordable, and it needs to be accessible for the elderly and disabled. Transport is not a gender-neutral issue. Understanding the different ways in which women use transport is essential to building inclusive transport infrastructure which everybody feels comfortable and safe using. Our Citizens' Assembly on Biodiversity Loss had a clear message for the government that they have comprehensively failed in implementing laws to protect our native flora and fauna. Once a species is extinct, we can never get it back. A third of our bee species are endangered, which has serious implications for the production of our food, as does the quarter of our bird species that are endangered also. The inability to produce food that is resistant to pests or an unpredictable climate will be catastrophic for our farmers and the many people that they feed. We need to protect our biodiversity to ensure that this scenario does not occur. Farmers are the custodians of our land with rich knowledge and understanding of it. They must be supported and encouraged to conserve and restore biodiversity. Green spaces, forests, and clean seas are good for our health and vital to the survival of species that call them home. The generations to come after us deserve to experience Ireland's native flora and fauna in person, not just in photographs and videos of the past. This is why Feminist Communities for Climate Justice is so important. We want to make sure that the communities of Ireland will have the knowledge, tools, and capacities to ensure that everybody in their community is part of the discussion and decision-making in reducing carbon emissions and greening their communities. We know that community workers have always been at the forefront of identifying issues that risk disrupting or unfairly impacting the areas that they work in, and that nobody knows a community better than the people who call it home. And that's why our project is aimed at them, the people who will be most impacted. Ultimately, all policy must be gender, poverty, and equality proofed. And there is no policy area or crisis that we are currently experiencing that does not have a link to climate breakdown. All policy is climate policy. Every move our government makes in any policy area must be done with an eye to our legally binding carbon emission reductions targets. The transition to net zero will need to happen, but if we don't make justice a mandatory part of that transition, we risk worsening existing inequalities or merely greening them. We don't want green sexism. We don't want zero emissions poverty or homelessness. We want everyone to enjoy our green future on equal footing, a future that should not benefit some at the expense of others. We have a chance to create a world which is fairer to our environment and to marginalised groups in our society, and we need to take it now. I hope that you'll join us and help us in our aims to achieve feminist community climate justice. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll pass you back on to Colette now.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And yes, at this point, again, I just encourage you to throw any questions you may have into the chat box and also sign up to our mailing list through this QR code, and we'll come to them at the end. But at this point of the webinar, we're actually going to introduce Claire Kenny of the Independent Living Movement Ireland, ILMI. ILMI aims for disabled people to achieve independent living, choice and control over their lives and full participation in society as equal citizens. Claire Kenny joined ILMI in January 21 as policy assistant, and as a very proud disabled woman who has faced some of the barriers encountered by many disabled people, Claire believes it is fundamentally important that disabled people are involved in a meaningful, authentic way in all facets of society, and that their contributions are valued and their rights respected. So I'll hand you over now to Claire. Thank you.
Thanks, Colette. Thanks for the invitation, both Colette and Vanessa, for taking part in this webinar. Climate change is a divisive challenge facing humanity. It does not discriminate. It does not pick and choose whom it affects. ILMI is a national cross-impairment disabled persons organisation as defined under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, UNCRPD. Central to how we work is to ensure that policy decisions that impact the lives of disabled people have to be directly influenced by those whose lives are directly affected. Our vision is an Ireland where disabled persons have freedom, choice, and control over all aspects of our lives and can fully participate in an inclusive society as equals. As a national disabled persons organisation, we are concerned that failure to treat climate change as a global emergency will have even greater consequences for people who are pushed to the edges of society. Until recently, decisions about sustainable development seldom included disabled people. Inclusivity goes beyond physical access. Attitudinal and long-held societal beliefs are significant barriers we face as disabled people. In Irish society, when we as disabled people are given a rare platform, we are often asked about our impairments, the limitations they impose, the lack of services, and the obstacles to our participation. Our lives are not defined solely by our impairments. We have complex identities shaped by ethnicity, class, gender, sexual identity, family status, and much more. We live full and active lives, yet we are continually subjected to tired tropes. The tragic disabled person or the inspirational hero who has overcome their impairment. We are often exploited for charity, but our rightful place as equal members of society who should be consulted on all issues we face is often overlooked. ILMI has consistently seen the interconnectedness between our lives and the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. It is essential that disabled persons' rights as human beings and global citizens are embedded in all SDGs, many of which directly align with the UNCRPD. We recognise and welcome that measures need to be urgently developed to reduce our carbon emissions drastically. However, any climate change action must not undermine our commitments to include disabled people. We appreciate that the development of climate change action could be transformative. Investment in sustainable housing and efficient transport systems are crucial to moving from environmental disasters to a more sustainable future. However, there is an urgent need to engage with DPOs to ensure that any public investment is fully inclusive and the exchequer funds are designated to meet the needs of everyone. Climate change and environmentalism are as much about social justice as it is about correcting the damage we have done to our planet. Disabled people are often disregarded in discourse and discussions relating to environmental justice. We are frequently seen as an afterthought or an energy burden rather than being part of a whole societal transformative effect for our shared future. Unfortunately, these decisions have unintended negative consequences on the lives of disabled people. Hard-fought gains in pedestrian areas and parking spaces are being eroded. Temporary changes made during COVID-19 are made permanent, denying us our access to our towns and cities due to permanent restrictions for undesignated external dining. Instead, we should wholly pedestrianise these spaces to genuinely include everyone. Disabled parking spaces are relocated without explanation, and floating bus stops hinder the safe access of disabled people and mobility limited people to public transport. The promotion of shared spaces directly impacts our ability to participate freely in society. These are just a few examples of how mobility of tens of thousands of disabled and older people is restricted throughout Ireland. What alarms us, however, is that many measures which were initially trialled as experimental are now implemented with little or no recognition of early objections to their design and with no new consultation with disabled people. It is these types of decisions made with good intentions to make life more sustainable but have a serious negative effect on disabled people's lives are an example of absolute lack of consultation process with disabled people and their DPOs. Moreover, without mechanisms of engaging meaningfully with authentic DPOs, there is tangible concern that climate change policies will reduce the inclusion of disabled people in our society. At the core of the SDGs is leave no one behind. Despite Ireland's commitment to these goals, both nationally and internationally, many disabled people are struggling and being left behind. If Ireland is genuinely committed to leaving no one behind, we must include in discussions that directly impact on our lives. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Claire. Thank you so much for your contribution and your insights about how climate justice and climate injustice impacts the disabled community. And at this point, I'm going to just hand you over to our next speaker, who is Mary Bridget. And Mary Bridget works at Pavy Point Traveller and Roma Centre, which is the national non-governmental organisation comprised of travellers, Roma and members of the majority population addressing traveller and Roma issues and promoting traveller and Roma rights. So Mary Bridget is coordinator of Pavy Point's Primary Healthcare for Travellers project, and Mary Bridget has been working on that, and this is a project that is the first time that travellers have went out into the community with the aim to identify the health needs of travellers. So I'm going to hand you over to Mary Bridget at this point, and I think I did say that if you had any questions, put them into the chat box, which was an error. If you can put them into the Q&A box, that'd be great, and we'll get back to them at the end. So I'll hand over to you now, Mary Bridget. Thank you.
Thank you, Colette. As Colette said, I'm Mary Bridget Collins. I'm the coordinator of the Primary Healthcare Project here in Pavy Point. And also, I'm a traveller and I work within my own community as well. And I suppose just to get what other speakers should just talk about how climate change is going to impact greatly on different communities, and particularly for women and people with disabilities. And I think the time is here now when women and travellers, as well as the ethnic groups, are all involved in decision making, that we don't have men who's making decisions for women and politicians making decisions and making the very wrong decisions. So I think we have to look at climate change and how it impacts on our health, but also on our mental health as well. And as a traveller going out to some of the sites, which lots of things has already been said there, and what we find with in the areas that where we live and work is lots of things around transport is usually impacting and greatly on travellers out there and how sites is built and where they're actually built. And what we find in our work is lots of the sites will be built up back roads beside graveyards, beside tips and dumps and illegal dumping, where actually sometimes where a lot of people from the general population, they won't build there. And that's a real problem for ourselves as well, because it impacted greatly again on women's health as well. Also, we've done a piece of work around footpaths and wheelchair accessibility as well, because we do have a lot of travellers out there would have mobility problems. And the footpaths, the cycle lanes, again, like all the other people has been talking here, has a huge impact on travellers there, the lack of these and lots of the sites where we work. Also, we're encouraged to take public transport, but if you're living in situations like this, it's quite difficult to take public transport because sometimes public transport don't go into them areas. They're too far up a back road, so therefore they don't have any public transport and they don't have any option only to drive. And we know how driving and the fumes from the cars and stuff can impact on people's health. Of course, we want to play our part in it. We always wanted to play our part in it. We always said that travellers was very good at recycling. If you look at travellers around the environment, and sometimes people will see travellers as destroying the environment, but if you look in the early 60s, when there was no plastic, a lot of travellers would have went around the country doing tinsmithing, mending buckets and stuff like that. When the plastic came in the early 60s, this drove a lot of travellers into the bigger cities like Dublin and Galway. So that trade was more or less lost. We've only two tinsmiths now in Ireland at the minute. But that was a great way to protect the environment. There was no waste, there was no plastic, and travellers played a huge part in it. If you look at travellers collecting scrap and going to the dumps and collecting metal and going to the scrap yard and selling it in and weighing it in as something else being made of, the same way with going to the markets and reusing and upcycling and stuff like that. So we've always played a part in the recycling of the environment, where sometimes, as I said, some people will see it as destroy the environment. If you look how job opportunities come in, and over 80% of travellers are unemployed at the minute, and this is impacting greatly on men and women. So if you look at all the recycling initiatives that's been set up, like the clothes bank, the bottle bank, I think this was a great way to for job opportunities from young men and women from our community, that you wouldn't need much of an education. They had the experience of doing it. And I think this is where the government has actually failed by not creating jobs for travellers out there. So this kind of impacts greatly on travellers as well, as it says, as women as well. And we do know that there's over 529 families on the roadside with no basic facilities, no toilets, no running water. And again, this is impacting greatly on a lot of travellers out there as well. As I said, the walk and the energy costs which come up there again as well for travellers, and particularly in trailers. We know that if somebody is living in a trailer, that they will burn up to 6 bags of fossil fuel a week because it's so cold. They don't have any electric heating or stuff like that. They didn't qualify for the ESB grants that was made available there with the price hikes that's all went up in the last couple of months. Lots of travellers in the caravans wouldn't have qualified for them, because in lots of the areas where we work, a lot of travellers would have been doubled up. So you could have a house, but you could have a trailer in the back of the yard, separate home, separate income. But the ESB grants would have went to the household, not to the people in the trailers. So we do know that they can burn up to 6 or 7 bags of fossil fuel a week, particularly in the winter. Also, we know that some local authorities need to be doing a lot more than what they're actually doing. And we know there is a trailer loan scheme there for our community as well. And we know it's up to €30,000, but we will say this is not enough. If somebody wants a really good trailer and wants to live in a trailer, you're looking at 130 to 440,000 for a good trailer with installation as well. And also for people that's living on sites in group housing schemes, we know a lot of them can't apply for their own grants for the installation. That all has to come through the local authorities. And we know we do have a pilot scheme at the minute, which is happening in the area where installation and electric heating is being put in, but that's only a pilot. So I think local authorities need to be doing their bit as well when it comes to traveller-specific accommodation and putting right things in place to protect travellers and to protect us in the future as well. So the accommodation has been a huge problem there for lots of travellers as well. We would see that nobody is left behind, and particularly for travellers as well. That we're all engaging in climate change, because as I said, it's going to impact greatly on travellers and every single one of us that's living around. So I think it is something that we need to look at, like the walking, where halting sites have been built, wheelchair accessible is what I said, and lots of other things like working with local authorities. We do know in some of the areas as well where lots of travellers has been living for quite a number of years, since the early 80s. And before the recession in 2008, the land would have been worth a lot of money. So now that the economy kind of picked up and is on the way back, we do know that some of this land now in this day and age is worth a lot more money. So there is new development happening in some of the areas where we work. And there's plans for apartments, shops and stuff like that. So we can see that they're going to put everything in place in these areas. But still, when you look at the travellers living in it, they didn't look at these things to be in place. So you're going to look at more bus routes into it, you're going to more services going into it, where in some of the years we work, people don't even get post, they don't get their appointments, they don't get bin collections. Different services might not call into different sites out there that we work on. So as I said, this is having a real impact on travellers out there, is what I said. But I do think it is something that needs to be looked at, and I said we can all work together. And we know MABS has done a piece of work around fuel poverty as well. And again, traveller groups and traveller organisations would have inputted into that as well. And I do know from Pavy Point side of it, we have actually taken part in Climate Action Plan, Clean Air Strategy and the Energy Poverty Consultation as well. So these are spaces that we really all need to be in. And we all really need to be supporters as well, because as it says, climate change is here. And I really do think it's something that we could have worked on, well, the government could have worked on long before the situation that we're actually in now. They are looking at certain targets at certain times and years to come. And it's going to greatly impact on the poorest of the poorest as well. So I think that's where we all need to be careful, and I think our voices need to be heard, and we need to be at the table when decisions is being made, and that none of us is left behind. I don't know if I have anything else. I know a lot of stuff came up there, and even when we look at sites, they're coming off the M50, so you have lots of big trucks just coming down, and you have lots of cars coming, and the fumes for that as well. Also, no play areas for our children. Overcrowding is a huge problem in some of the sites where we work as well. And as I said, lots of them would have no running water, no electricity. So this is having a great impact on travellers' health out there as well. So I think we can all make a difference if we all work together. But I think the government needs to be engaging with people on the ground. As I said, all of us here today having a talk about it and discussing it here, that what should be done. But I think it is time now that we kind of all at the table, is what I said, given our own views, and that nobody would ever be left behind, because you know how it's going to greatly impact, like the recession in 2008. We know how that impacted on people, but it impacted greatly on the poorest of the poorest. So I think it really needs to be looked at. But I think there's lots more that we could talk about. As I said, there's lots of them has been covered, and we do know the situation of travellers there living in trailers, living in group housing schemes, up beside dumps, graveyards. We know the radon gas is a huge problem. We know in certain areas where there has been local tips in the early 80s that a lot of people would have died from cancer as well. So it's quite obvious that's having an impact on people's health as well. So I think it's something that we do really need to look at, we need to watch. But as I said, local authorities has a huge part to play as well around footpaths, wheelchair accessible, and I do see that in my own area. We've done a piece of work around footpaths down to travellers halted sites, and absolutely no footpaths at all. No public lighting will be another one as well. So it is impacting greatly on travellers out there, but also on traveller women as well. We can see it greatly out there. But as I said, a lot of stuff has been already said, and we kind of know what the kind of issues is out there. But as I said, it is about working together and letting our voices be heard, and to be heard in the future as well.
Thanks so much, Mary Bridget, and same goes to Claire Kenny. It's really valuable and important that we get everyone's experiences and lived experiences on the table, and that we can all respond to climate policies and plans and within all of our communities to ensure that no one is left behind, as you said yourself, Mary Bridget.